Minister Blume, colleagues from the European Commission, members of the European Parliament, Austrian Parliament, and colleagues from journalism, I'm very honored to be here today. And the last time that Austria had the presidency of the Council of the European Union was in 2006. And just like today, Austria hosted an international conference back then to explore the future of the Internet and its impact on society. Big topics back then were e-inclusion and the digital divide, just as important as today. I was still a reporter in California in 2006, covering Silicon Valley, when the Austrian Chancellery was kind enough to invite me to join this conference. 2006 is also the year when Twitter was founded and when Facebook had annual revenues of $40 million, which is nothing compared to today's $40 billion in revenue and roughly $15 billion in profit. In these years since 2006, I, as Sebastian told you, already moved back to Germany, then joined The Guardian, and am now the president of Condé Nast International, where I travel a lot. And I have the privilege, that rare privilege, of looking at the European Union also from the outside a lot. It's a funny thing, you become a European when you look at Europe from the outside, more than anything else. But we can't all help all Europeans to travel, to come to that realization how important it is that we stick together and that we jointly develop this digital single market. Over the course of these years, since 2006, there were these few key moments where me and many other colleagues suddenly stepped back and said, something just happened, something changed, the Internet has changed, society has changed. One of these moments for me was the election of Barack Obama, which now it's easy to forget that he really was an outsider when he began campaigning for the nomination within the Democratic Party. Then there was Arab Spring 2011. Many of you might remember how journalists around the world wrote pieces about how Facebook helps democracy, how Facebook nurtures democracy at different times. Another key moment for me were the Edward Snowden revelations when I worked at The Guardian. And there was only a very small core team of Guardian colleagues that were given access to the Snowden files. I did not see them. But of course, there were many meetings around them to support this team of investigative journalists. And there was this one day where this small group of investigative journalists suddenly alerted us and said, do not take your smartphones into any meetings, even if you think they are switched off. I sat in a meeting room and could look through the glass window and saw that pile of smartphones stacked up outside our meeting room. And it was another one of these key moments for me in my perception of the Internet, because I thought, they stole the Internet from us. They broke it. And then there were the most recent presidential elections in the United States, 2016, with an unprecedented amount of interference, foreign interference also, and misinformation that was deliberately designed to rip our societies apart. There were also key business moments since that last conference. One, of course, was for me early last year when it became evident that Google and Facebook now account for more than half of the United States' total digital advertising market, and that they account for more than 90% of that digital advertising market's year-over-year growth. And as I traveled, there was another such key moment, and that was again late last year when I realized that the Chinese internet giants, Tencent, parent company of WeChat, surpassed the total stock market value of Facebook. We're now entering a world of highly fragmented and ever more fragmenting internets, also called the splinternet. And we're all seeing and experiencing, especially here in Central Europe, the American-owned and run internet of Google, Facebook, Apple, and Amazon. But there's also the Chinese-owned and run internet of Alibaba, Tencent, and Baidu. With Europe, Africa, the Middle East, Latin America, and Southeast Asia's digital economies getting squeezed between these two dominant digital spheres of the Chinese and the US-American players. China's digital players still have vast growth opportunities at home, but they are in expansion mode as well. Just go into any luxury store in Paris, fashion store, jewelry store, and at the cash registers, you will see these little stickers, we accept Alipay, we accept WeChat Pay. Initially, this is to better serve the fast-growing amount of Chinese tourists. But the ambitions also from my own personal visits to the headquarters of these Chinese companies are, of course, to expand globally just as much as the American companies. Now, this should not sound like a list of regrets and complaints. Personally, I think the internet has been and is predominantly positive for culture, for trade, for politics, science, journalism, and also for the European integration. But in these years, since 2006 and since our last conference here in Austria, we have also witnessed how the internet has been militarized and weaponized against democracy, against journalism, against societal consensus and cohesion, and almost against information and science itself in ways I personally would have found hard to imagine at that last conference in 2006. So in light of all that, wouldn't it be so easy for me and also for all of you to lean back and say, wow, how naive have we been back then? We could not have imagined, not even in our wildest dreams, how the world and the internet, how politics and our economies would look like and function today. But you know what? That wouldn't be true. We weren't naive. Back then, we did discuss many of these exact issues and milestones I've mentioned in very abstract terms. The only thing most of us did not do back then, I would say, is that we did not think big enough. We did not think big enough about the positives as well as the negative effects of these new technologies. So my question to you and to this conference is, how can you think bigger this time around? Because the societal changes brought about and expressed through new technologies will only accelerate further. How can we get better at anticipating these changes? A technology forecaster from Silicon Valley, Paul Saffo, had this to say already in the early 2000s, and I quote, he said, "As society and as individuals, we all suffer from what I call macro myopia." For the Germans, myopia is Kurzsichtigkeit. A pattern where our hopes and our expectations or our fears about the threatened impact of some new technology cause us to overestimate its short-term impacts. And reality always fails to meet those inflated expectations. And as a result, our disappointment then leads us to turn around and underestimate the long-term implications. And I can guarantee you this time will be no different. The short-term impact of this stuff, he meant the web, the short-term impact of this stuff will be less than the hype would suggest, but the long-term implications will be vastly larger than we can possibly imagine today. End of quote. So in short, what is he saying? He said, we overestimate the short-term impacts of new technologies just as much as we simultaneously underestimate their long-term impacts. Many of you are working in strategy one way or another. You're executing long-term strategies. You're lawmakers, regulators, members of parliaments or governments. We all depend on you as you formulate laws and regulations which in the future will have to be applied to yet unknown situations. We depend on you thinking big. And no, the past never repeats itself, but past experience can certainly support us in thinking bigger. Let me give you an example for that. Over the course of your own careers, you must have heard a large amount of comparisons between the emergence of the internet and the invention of the printing press, right? Who has not heard that comparison between the internet and the printing press? So everybody. You must have heard about the decades-long resistance and skepticism of leading libraries in the late 15th and early 16th century against printed books, and also how the printing press upended the entire process of academic publishing back then. You will have heard about the wonders the printing press did for science and how it enabled the science revolution that became the Renaissance. Or, to dramatically abbreviate and oversimplify, how we would summarize the story of the wonderful printing press today. A dominant cultural assumption today is that books are predominantly good, have been good for humanity, and that to this day, printed words are more credible than handwritten words, and still more credible than digitally distributed text. The American author and historian Timothy Snyder just wrote that little bestseller recently called On Tyranny, trying to encourage us all to not get cynical and to keep defending democracy and common decency in this age of growing misinformation and autocracy. And then in this mostly wonderful little book, he strongly, and I find strangely so, recommends to read the work of print journalists. Why does he do that? In 2018. This is a leading intellectual, and yet this is how we seem, all of us, including myself, to mostly associate good things with the technology of printing words on paper. And believe me, as the president of one of the world's largest magazine publishing companies, while we also publish huge social media accounts, I share that joy and admiration for print, but that's another story. So let me share another historic fact about the printing press with you, which might surprise you, and that we conveniently ignore today. The invention of the printing press in the 1400s, the ability to mass produce printed pamphlets and political and religious cartoons for those who could not read in the 1500s, is directly related to the Protestant Reformation and to the 30-Year War, that horrible European civil war from 1618 to 1648, which, next to World War II, has become Europe's other defining trauma. Looking at Europe's total population size at that time, it was one of the most destructive conflicts in European history. Because as you know, before printed books, the majority of books in Europe were handwritten and mostly produced by churches or church-controlled universities. It was the printing press, very, very similarly so to social media. It was the printing press, the suddenly affordable and uncontrollable, quick, cheap mass distribution of information and misinformation on leaflets as texts and images or memes that rapidly eroded and then destroyed the value system, the religious order, and the societal order of the Middle Ages, including its content industries. It is estimated today that the population in what is today's Germany was reduced by the 30-Year War by 25 to 40%. Württemberg, where I'm from, lost about 3/4 of its population back then. Now again, I love books as much as I love the web and benefit from the web and social media, but I wonder sometimes when I listen to policy discussions in the United States, my other home, as much as here in Europe, when I listen to the complaints and the defensiveness and the growing protectionism of some of my own trade organizations in the publishing industry, I wonder, what made you think the internet would not be as disruptive, not be as dangerous, not be as chaotic, and not be as wonderful in its effects as the printing press was when that all started? Why would we treat the truly disruptive and destructive effects of the internet and social media as an anomaly, as a surprise, as an aberration, instead of expecting even greater turmoil in the years to come, which you should, and use that as the assumption, the underlying assumption, to inform our future strategies? Because if you think of the internet's disruptiveness as the anomaly, as the out of the order, as what was not meant to happen, then your first and foremost instincts will always be to try and limit it, to contain it, to punish it also through punitive legislation, to delay its effects, and to stifle it. So as an example, sure, break up Facebook, as one of the leading candidates for the role of President of the European Commission is suggesting again these days. Spend all that legislative and regulatory energy on breaking up Facebook. And then what? Sure, issue ancillary copyrights to make aggregators and search engines pay for the content snippets we publishers have optimized in the first place so they would show up more prominently on their search engine result pages and in their social feeds. You can do all that, but in the bigger picture, you won't really shape nor nurture Europe's own digital future, Europe's own global digital contributions to humanity, if you play defense so much better than you play offense. And to be very clear, I'm not at all against regulation. Good law, good regulation are a bit like manure. If applied correctly, they do wonders for growth. The dosage makes the difference. I'm also not against time-limited protectionism either, not even against the hidden protectionism of using copyright law or consumer protection law or data privacy laws as a means to limit the power of the internet giants, whether they are from the US or increasingly from China. I'm just asking you this. While the EU is currently resorting to hidden or outright digital protectionism, what is it really trying to protect? What is it trying to give time and protection so it can grow? What are you nurturing? Or is that beautiful single digital market just about building a wagon fortress for the sake of giving Europe's old content businesses, its mostly outdated publishing companies, its mostly underfunded e-commerce players, and its reform-averse, but in so many other ways wonderful and vital, essential public broadcasters, more time to make up their minds, without pushing them also as hard towards greater competitiveness as the EU is already pushing against the American internet giants? Now, you wouldn't have invited me if you wouldn't know that I'm passionately pro-EU, as much as I also believe in the promise still of American democracy still being alive and still being able to recover. But currently, a lot weighs on us Europeans. I have no interest in bashing the EU or its digital strategy, but I am worried about a few things. I'm worried about how defensive and also how timid we look from the outside. I work in the United States about every other month. I work in China every 3 months, and I travel all over Europe almost every month to spend time with our teams. And I worry that the EU thinks too much about maintaining or regaining some sort of sovereignty over its own digital sphere, and that it does not think nowhere near enough about making Europe a global digital player in its own right. As you know, there's not a single European search engine that is globally competitive. There is not a single social media platform out of Europe at global scale, and there is no video aggregator that could compete with the American and Chinese market leaders, while newer Chinese-owned social apps such as Musical.ly are now enjoying fast user growth in countries like Italy and Germany already. So I understand why it is tempting to still think about EU funding for a European search engine or a European video portal. And I don't want to dismiss the idea, but I'd rather point to a much bigger digital opportunity and necessity, and that is the idea of Europe owning, driving forward that space of neural machine translation. The EU has invested into software-based translation, of course, a lot already, but it seems it did so mostly as a means to reduce internal translation costs. The amounts invested were tiny and nothing compared to what would be needed. Because, as you know, we currently have 24 official languages in the EU and many, many more unofficial ones. And if you want to reach Europeans in our wonderful future digital single market, if you want to reach Europeans in their own native language, which you better do if you want them to buy something from you, for instance. If you want to reach Europeans in their own native language, not a single one of our 24 languages can reach more than 20% of the entire EU population. If you then resort to English as the EU's most common second language, your digital content, your digital services, your journalism, your tourism offers still only reach about 50% of the EU's 510 million citizens. And even that number is questionable, as it is one thing to have a chat in English, it is something else to sign a contract in English, to order something in English, to forge a new business partnership for your startup in English. So let's assume the best case that the EU will soon complete its decades-long project of standardizing European copyright, European consumer rights, data protection laws, that it will make transnational e-commerce transactions completely frictionless. The linguistic fragmentation, which is also a beautiful thing, our diversity, but the linguistic fragmentation of that market remains a bottleneck we need to think about more aggressively. And we should look at it as a giant opportunity. Search from a user perspective is a problem that has been solved. Yes, there can always be better search engines, more respectful of our privacy. Google has many technical problems, but overall, search is not the bottleneck for a European single digital market. The distribution, the cheap and fast and live distribution of content across Europe is, from a technological perspective, a problem that has been solved. Yes, it is mostly YouTube and other platforms. Yes, there are issues around copyrights and revenue shares, but from a user perspective, I can reach everyone. So why run behind these initiatives? Why make these gigantic investments with very uncertain outcome if there is a third interface that is missing, not only in Europe, but around the entire world, and that is the translation API? Who is more destined to own that space? Who is more credible? Who has already the cultural fabric in place, as well as the scientists, to do this, to offer the translation API to the world, if it is not us, Europeans? And of course you could argue, well, everybody will speak English soon. A, I don't believe that. I don't think so. And we don't have the time to wait for that. Would that even be the case? And B, if we don't develop that translation API, either the US or China will. And the incentive for China is much greater to develop machine translation, because not enough Chinese will learn English quickly enough, and not enough people around the world will learn Mandarin quickly enough. Whereas in the US, it is learned behavior to experience that everybody speaks English to a degree with you anyways. So do we really want that intersection between every single one of our 24 languages and our many more languages in Europe, that intersection, which someone will develop, is not owned by us? And again, just like the printing press, will it be all benign? Will it all bring about peace and cultural understanding? No, of course not. Like every media technology, there will be irritation, there will be confusion, there will be politically influenced translation algorithms, there will be manipulation, there will be copyright conflicts we can't even imagine yet, when, for instance, with natural language processing, you will see a movie as an actor and you hear your own voice speaking in another language, which is in the realm of the possible. And you say, that's not what I said, or that is not my artistic expression. But the alternative is not to not do it. I spoke about this in advance to a German wire service, DPA, and I said the European Union should make machine translation one of its flagship projects, the so-called Future Emerging Technology projects, where the EU dedicates 1 billion euros over the course of 10 years. And it was telling for me, in a sweet way, how the headline that made it into the German news sites was, Blau demands 1 billion to protect European languages from extinction. Because that is the frame we all understand. The EU should do something to protect something. My interest, yes, it's wonderful to protect our linguistic diversity. My interest is to unleash, to untangle our digital single market in Europe, because it is our only chance. No pressure. And I want to close also in thanking every single one of you for the little and the big things you have done over these last years to contribute to the creation of the European Union. The world depends on us. Thank you very much. Keep going.